Great. Thank you so much, Jason. And, as an O'Brien, I'd be remiss if I didn't say Happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. Oh, Marlys is wearing her green. One problem with my Irish wardrobe is I don't seem to actually own any green. So I figured I'd at least bring out the pink today and add a little color. So happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. And thanks for joining us here today. I joined AttackIQ at the start of the pandemic, so never a better time to switch careers. And it was really great to see those two logos up there because prior to joining AttackIQ, I actually spent 5 years at Nutanix. And one of the things that drew me to AttackIQ is the potential disruption that this platform can bring to the industry in a good way, in a transformative way, much like Nutanix transformed the way that people build and manage and run their data centers. Hopefully what you're going to learn a little bit more today is how AttackIQ can kind of do the same thing for how you continually assess, validate, and build confidence that the controls you have in place, that the security program you have in place is actually working as expected to keep you, your data, your customers safe, your brand reputation. So that's a little bit about me. Over to you, Marlys. I know you've got just an amazing experience in the industry. We're going to hear some of your story as your journey at CSSA Insurance Group. I also always like to start with a little bit of an icebreaker, something that maybe we wouldn't learn if we went into your LinkedIn profile. So if there's anything that you feel comfortable sharing, please do.
Sure. I was thinking about kind of hobbies or something you might not know about me. I will tell you, I don't have anything glamorous to say, like being a rock climber, or, I do like my wine, but one thing that you would not know about me is that I am a huge stand-up comedian fan, and I follow every single stand-up comedian. In fact, at the start of the pandemic, I was about to see Michelle Wolf and Tracy Morgan, both got rescheduled. It's something that I absolutely love. Love all kinds of comics, from, ones that I can share with my two sons, like Jim Gaffigan or Brian Regan, kind of the family friendly, to, I saw Cat Williams front row and center, and it was fantastic. And it was the first time Leslie Jones, if you've ever seen her on SNL, she was actually at a really big show. So huge fan of stand-up comedy. And I think it's a great balance, thinking about how serious the job is that we have in security, finding ways to laugh. So that's something a little bit about me.
I love it. Have you tried it yourself?
Oh, no. But my youngest son believes that he will be. So when he goes to bed at night, he turns on Alexa and he's listening to either a podcast or some stand-up comedian. So I think he'll be the one in the family to be that. But no, I just want to be a fan. I just want to be a fan.
What a great way to blow off steam. Thank you for sharing that. I know you're going to share, you had quite an interesting start to your journey at CSSA Insurance Group. And if I recall correctly, you had just about a week to figure out the state of your cybersecurity program.
Yeah.
And then present those findings to your board, to your leadership team. And I have to imagine that many in the audience are doing the same thing. They have to either get up quarterly or periodically to share the state of the health of their cybersecurity program. So maybe, Jason, we could run the first poll just quickly to understand how many people actually find themselves in similar shoes.
There we go, folks. So the poll is up. Do you regularly present to your board or auditors on the status of your cybersecurity program? Often, sometimes, or not at all. Very straightforward answers. We'll let this go for another 10 to 12 seconds or so. It allows many people to participate as possible. Keep it coming, folks. There are still 20 of you who have not voted. We'll give another 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Last minute vote in there. Fantastic. There you go.
Marlys, I believe you fell into the often category yourself, right?
Yeah, quarterly. Yeah. So, and I can kind of share a little bit about that story. So I joined CSA just almost 2 years ago. And I came in from PayPal, where I was doing risk and compliance oversight for information security. And so coming into this, it was sort of this, very fast transition. And the second day on the job, I was flying across, to California I'm actually based in Scottsdale right now. And, first day we sat down and all the executive leadership team was there, brand new CEO, CIO had been there, but had just been named. So, definitely new faces. And they said, okay, so Marlys, in a week and a half, we have a board meeting and we think that we would like for you to, talk to them, for them to hear from you. I said, okay, great. What would you like me to talk about? Why don't you tell them your 3-year strategy? So I said, okay. And really the 3-year strategy was, well, it's how do you move from reactive to preventative? How do you get to real-time risk reporting? It's really the basic things that, as every security professional dreams about, and that's really what I laid out. I think the other part of the prep was really just getting kind of that view of, well, what had been presented to the board. And I think so much of what the team, great ideas, great thoughts and vision, but everything was being talked about as strategic. And when I looked at what was there, it wasn't even table stakes. It was like the wedges, just to keep the table balanced. And I realized, okay, there hadn't been enough money spent to date, not a lot of focus perhaps or commitment. And so, that immediate conversation with the board was, what I thought about the program. And I was extremely forward with them. I said, you have not had, and I still always knock on wood, I'm very superstitious, but you've not had a breach because frankly, you've been lucky and maybe people haven't been paying attention. I mean, it was that in that type of state of things. And so there was definitely some quick orientation with them, but I think they appreciated that transparency and just the pure honesty of, no, this is where we are and this is where you need to be. So yeah, it is something that I talk to them every quarter about. And we've got scorecards and all kinds of things that, we're talking with them about.
Mm-hmm. And I believe you also help them understand, what your definition of getting to cyber excellence looked like too. Is that correct?
Yeah. So that one of the very first things that we did in that first session, they wanted, an objective view from the outside. So did I, of what was really going on in terms of what we had implemented. And so, the very first thing we did, and that was second quarter board. By third quarter board, we were sitting in front of them. I, in partnership with one of our outside, like the Big Four firms, saying, okay, let's look at this from a maturity perspective. Let's look across the 21 cyber domains. Where do we stand? Like legitimately, where are we in terms of just pure maturity using the CMMI scale? And where we were was not anywhere to the degree of maturity any cyber organization should be. Luckily, there were some that we were stronger at than others, but it gave some immediate focus and just, okay, this is where we're starting. Here's where we need to go. And so every quarter after that, by fourth quarter, 2 months later, we were presenting, here's the exact roadmap. Here's the scoring, every single quarter that we need to hit and achieve. And by the way, we're not coming up with these scores and saying how important something might be. We actually relied on the external party and creating that objectivity in terms of the reporting, but then we just created the plan, right? And it was like 150 projects in 2020 to get to a state of, like you said, you've got foundation and then you've got excellence. And foundation is, let's get everything at that right level of maturity, the requisite set of controls. And then excellence, which really, one would argue excellence is always, we're always trying to get to that. It's ever evolving. But it was more in being extremely consistent and having a very measured approach and a measurable approach to where we wanted to be. So we're getting there. We're not just straight up. We are not in excellence in all the categories yet. Some are harder than others. Some take a lot longer. And I'm sure many on the call will relate, right? Access control, a lot of these things that really take a lot of work to do. So yeah, that's really what our journey's been.
Now, the velocity, I think, as we've seen, particularly in certain industries over this past year, healthcare, financial services, we've just seen an onslaught of attacks and breaches over the past year. So how does your team stay on top of sort of the adversary of the moment, right? So you get your foundation in place, moving from reactive to more proactive, preventative, but how do you start to move in that direction, given that the intensity has really ratcheted up during COVID-19?
Yeah, so, and you're right, it is kind of that sort of flavor of the moment, and being constantly adaptive. So for us, we've been working on it in a few ways. So obviously tools, people, and use of breach and simulation and enhanced threat intelligence. And one thing I'll just say, and I saw this in the chat, someone asked about kind of the investment to the risk. I mean, yes, but I do think cybersecurity investment is really what helped propel us, and it's sort of foundational. Like, in my mind, the biggest change in the last couple of years, the tools, the people, all of the ways that we need to do what we're doing have continued to enhance, but you actually need money to go do this stuff. And for us, the commitment, the investment, certainly, relating that, just going back to the question I saw in the chat, is really important. But, fortunately, I had that commitment. I was extremely lucky. And I'm going to emphasize that because I know many people still struggle with that in terms of getting that tone at the top. But for us, it was in those three areas. So one thing I'll just start with is the breach and simulation tool. And so we do use AttackIQ. We've used it in a few different ways. And I've kind of talked to my team before, joining this call, because I wanted to really get some, current examples to share. But first of all, we use it to assess our security controls a lot more effectively. So we made this big investment in tools and people, but how are we optimizing what we have? Because I think everyone knows, right? You build out use cases, you develop your policies, but if the flavor of the day is changing and evolving, and you need to really assess where you are in the kill chain, and that's not something that you just know, or that every tool out of the box provides you. That's something that you really have to start to test. And so that's what the breach and simulation, the BAS tool, AttackIQ, has really helped us. So, for instance, knowing how ransomware is prevented, detected, when the SIM, receives the alert, it tells us so much more about our reaction time and the effectiveness of our detection versus prevention. Because obviously we want to prevent it from ever even hitting, versus trying to bring it in and contain it. As I mentioned, it's also about understanding the kill chain. So really looking at the defense in depth analysis and where in that kill chain the ransomware gets detected and prevented. Using the tool has also, or the platform, I should say, has really helped us optimize, as I mentioned, the tooling that we have. It's given us a lot deeper insights, and we've made great investments, I'd say, in some really effective, like endpoint detection tools. Fantastic. But the reality is that, for instance, when we were testing ransomware samples on execution, the ransomware would get blocked. However, when it was copied from machine to machine, what we noticed is it would only detect presenting the opportunity in the kill chain. It wouldn't stop the threat from spreading. We would not have known that had we not been doing some of the simulation testing. Same thing with our DLP. So we've had data loss prevention capabilities for a while. We did a full-blown, implementation. Let's cut stuff off, making sure that, we're really doing some great monitoring. But we were actually able to simulate the exfiltration of credit card data using the DNS protocol and providing some valuable insights to the data protection function on ways that we could enhance that. And by the way, that interaction that I just described, you've got the team with the BAS platform telling the other team in security how to enhance what they do. And that's been a huge kind of cultural shift in all of this, kind of behind the scenes, is being able to provide, really good data to the other teams to say, yep, you guys have done a great job and developing the policies, building out the use cases, but there's still more work to be done. things that even, the partners may not know, or, the technologists may not be aware of. And so it's kind of helped break down some of those barriers, I think, culturally, where everybody thinks, hey, I'm the expert, I have everything done. And then the last part I'd say, in addition to using BAS and AttackIQ, is really the threat intelligence. So we've been able to, I would say with that combination, do more proactive insights to the work that we're doing in the breach and simulation efforts. And the combination has actually allowed us to move from kind of actionable intelligence to proactive testing. And that's really what's starting to generate that sort of focus, where we want to go, what's the next thing we want to look at, because, you do have to prioritize your efforts. You can't be, doing breach and attack simulation on everything. And certainly you want to look at the things not only that are of, great importance in terms of what we're trying to protect, but also what's really driving the greatest risks that we're seeing. And I think, that's the other part, that when we talk about the risks that we're seeing, it's also how we're informed by the broader community. And that's something that I think in using the tooling that we have, we do get those insights. And I know that's one of the biggest challenges is, security groups sharing with each other. It's actually an automatic part of, what we're getting out of the efforts that we're doing. So I know long answer there, but there were just some really great examples that my team brought forward as we've been doing, our evaluation that, I thought the audience might appreciate.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you sort of hit the nail on the head. And we hear this a lot from really progressive CISOs that realize you need to break down the silos between the teams to be able to really embrace that kind of threat mindset and share information with each other. So it's not just about the red team or the blue team, but really more of a purple team approach, where you have people sharing sharing what's happened and solving the problem together, figuring out how to close those gaps. One way that we do see a lot of customers sort of operationalizing how they validate their controls is by using the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And I'm actually just curious, maybe this is where we could pop up our next poll, Jason. So I'd really like to understand from the audience, how important is the MITRE ATT&CK framework to your cybersecurity strategy?
Okay, folks, we'll leave this up for another 15 seconds or so. Votes are coming in. Thank you, thank you, thank you. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Last minute votes in there. There we go. Okay, there you go.
Okay, so kind of an interesting mix, but looks like a lot of interest around, planning to operationalize MITRE ATT&CK if not already underway. And I'd also love to hear, maybe in the chat too, if there are no plans to adopt, if there's a particular reason, or if it's just something that hasn't crossed your radar yet, or you just haven't had a chance to evaluate what the framework might do for you. But any comments that you want to make, or that your team passed along with regards to MITRE ATT&CK?
Yeah, so and it's interesting on the no plans to adopt, because I think, and I've also been monitoring the chat as well around, I agree, CISOs are not here to bring the rest down to zero, because if it was zero, then we wouldn't make any money or do business. So I agree. But one thing that MITRE does, I think, is it provides that perspective or context as you're talking about what security does or what value it does. Because the conversations I've been having lately, and this is where kind of the combination of leveraging MITRE, in the breach and simulation efforts, cross-section with kind of threat intelligence, because, board executive leadership team, what do they hear? They hear what happens in the news. What does that mean to us? Are we prepared to, are we prepared against a particular, threat? And I think what's really helpful with things like MITRE is, yeah, it's not all of them every day that they're going to understand, and I'm just looking at the MITRE ATT&CK framework, right, of persistence, privilege escalation. They're not going to understand those specifics, but if you talk to them about, ransomware, and then you talk about a specific way that we can be attacked, and then how our system responded to it. And then, oh, by the way, here are the tools that we invested in that helped us respond to this in a way that didn't just detect it or contain it, but would actually just absolutely prevented it from even coming into the environment. And to me, that is where you've got to change the conversation and where these tools have to be used. Yes, in a technical way, in the way that we intend for them to be used, but it's how, as any person in security, should be able to sell the value of what it is that we're doing, and then put it and place it with actual data to back it up. And so, for the 10% that said no plans to adopt, the only thing I would just sort of encourage you to think about is, if you're not going to adopt it directly, do think about ways that you are measuring kind of the success of the way your tools are operating, because I'm telling you, the question comes up every single day about whether or not, what the security spend, and in talking to a lot of the, my peers, there's always this question about spend and security. And I'm thinking, you do realize literally SolarWinds was a national security threat. If you don't think that is scalable and hits every single company every day and impacts our brand, which we have, it's sort of immeasurable at that point, spending a little bit of extra money to do this, you need as many things as a security organization to sort of come back and kind of combat that. And that's where I think the MITRE framework has been really helpful. And obviously I've shared, a bunch of different examples in the way that we've been using it to test. Ransomware is a big one, because ransomware obviously was on the hit list for COVID that, became really, critical.
Yeah,
so,
and that's actually a great segue, because my next question for you is, how did the SolarWinds breach impact conversations in your organization around cybersecurity and your readiness or your ability to detect something like that?
Yeah. So, SolarWinds, it's an interesting one, because when you look at it in its purest form, okay, we're using that version of the software. Well, I can tell you that our IT ops function was not using it. Do we use SolarWinds? Yes, we do. We were not using that version because our partners had not upgraded. Yay. Well, okay, that's great, but what's the opportunity here? And one thing I'll just share with the group is, just before I came back from Christmas break, and I sent it out, and at the end of it, I called it my Jerry Maguire letter after I wrote it, because the conversation I had and the email that I was sending to the team, so it was the head of risk, head of audit, head of compliance, and some of our executive team members, was, hey, take a big step back. SolarWinds is, yes, a supply chain attack. Those have existed for a long time. But when you think about the risk to our particular company, you have to start looking at what's your data footprint. Who has possession of your data? How much have you done in terms of third-party risk assessments? It really, I wanted the teams to start thinking about things I had already been worried about, which is, who has control of our information? Because, not having been with this company for, just the last couple of years, there was a history prior to me. And that history prior to me was, oh, it's okay to share data as long as they meet a minimum acceptable level of security controls. Well, the problem is that minimum level of security controls only escalates when you think about their possession of your data in a cloud environment. And when you look at SolarWinds is a perfect example where, hey, most of the industry was using this tool. And while the main kind of threat was espionage, that data is still worth something to somebody. And basically, we're all of us on this call are waiting for someone to tell us our data was exposed through, whatever backdoor had been established for the last, 9 months in the time frame that happened. So it was a great conversational moment where it's like, no, we got to take a whole different perspective here. And you have to look at the collective risk of some of the decisions we're making. Because when you look at an attack like that, it isn't, oh, we're reusing that version of the software. It's, okay, who else was using that version, and do they have our data, and what does that mean, and what greater controls do we need to have, let alone the bigger question, which is, what are we really doing with these vendors that have our data, that have not have our data, but that we're relying on in terms of security? and companies like that, and what their security controls are. And not to drag SolarWinds through the mud here, but clearly they had problems. The question is, there were a lot of us using it. How did no one find that question out? How did nobody understand, what that risk was? So it just begs a much bigger conversation, I think, in terms of how we're also assessing our third parties too. But
and
anyway, I could go on, Julie.
I can tell you have a lot of passion there. Well, and it is something like that does spark the conversation, and I think it does give you a chance to step back and look at, is there a new way that we should be thinking about our people, our process, our technology, and what are the many back doors that we don't realize could be open. So I do love that you have been taking that sort of three-pronged approach since you started at CSSA Insurance Group, right? Let's take a look at how we're structuring the organization so that we're better sharing information inside the team. Let's adopt a threat mindset. Let's look at new technologies that can, change the way that we're evaluating the investments that we've made in cybersecurity, what's working, what's not working, that we're finding problems before problems find us. And then making sure that you bring the board along and they understand where the risk is at and the strategy to go from just that reactive foundation to a truly proactive preventative program. So I know we're going to be running up on time here, but I guess, just sort of a closing question then. Do you have any last advice or suggestions for how, the rest of the audience should be thinking about people, process, technology in light of, this last year has been a hard year for many reasons, but, the adversarial ramp up has certainly been a very painful part of the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, definitely some different thoughts on it. And by the way, I'm also keep monitoring the chat. And before I answer that, Julie, I want to just acknowledge something that someone had in the chat about the prior topic about SolarWinds before we kind of leave it, which is they talked about the patching schedule. Could not agree more. I think that is something. And by the way, I felt I was one of the first people kind of asking that question. And internally, I got this look well, good thing you guys were lucky enough to not have upgraded, but do we need to be looking at upgrades and not 0 day, like somebody has here about the 0 day vulnerability? Certainly we need to be doing those, but we do need to be asking critical questions. But I do think, by the way, that is a really big question that we asked internally that I saw other forums talk about, which is, are we better off being delayed? For a long time it was, well, you need to patch and get to that next version. So you're optimizing, you're getting everything you need to. But I think that has to have a more risk-based approach. So sorry, I just wanted to acknowledge that question in the chat. But I think here's the advice I would offer, sort of COVID-19. I think everyone understands the threat landscape increased. Just a couple of different pieces. Number one, the thing about the pandemic is you have to always find the opportunities in these terrible circumstances. First one we had was, okay, we're going to put a lot of focus on training and awareness and certifying people internally, because you now have a footprint of people at home that, I mean, when we rolled out, we had a weekend a year ago, happy anniversary. It was 2 days ago, our entire company. Well, a big portion of our company, over half, are service employees. Some of them never had internet at home, let alone a computer. And so there was kind of the immediate opportunity to make sure everyone really had some, that training and awareness, and really, let's just face it, cramming security down people's throats. It's fine, do it. I wanted to do it anyway, so let's really push for it. So it gave us that opportunity. I think we still have that opportunity. The other thing I would just offer is, just consider this. I think we all recognize the fact that the footprint that exists today, the fact that I'm sitting at my house, most people are still going to be sitting at their houses, I'm going to say a year from now, not because they're not allowed to go back to the office, but because many companies, they're now realizing there's a cost savings, there's all kinds of things. Plus, let's face it, if we had another situation, which is likely, are you really going to place all of your employees in one building? I mean, we got lucky this time in terms of people not being perhaps ill. There's business continuity plans, things like that that we need to think about. So my point is, I think looking at the ways that we have been securing ourselves, I think is now we have the opportunity to really put stricter controls. I'm not saying shut down the business, but I am saying that if you have a company that argues like, no, we do need to still access personal email. No, we still need people on their corporate device to go out to TikTok. No, you don't. Go and use your own computer at home. Do not use your corporate device. Now is the time to start to really get people scared, worried, so that you can make those changes. Because all these people are at home, they're letting their kids, maybe they never had a device at home. They're letting people, I'm not saying that I've seen this, but I've got to believe it's true. They're letting family members get on their laptops. That's a corporate device that has corporate data. No one but you as an employee should have access to it. And so you got to think about those types of scenarios continuing. What are the corporate policies you need to implement from a security perspective? And like I said, I love it. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Exactly. That's exactly how I think about it. So, you know, I just, and by the way, last point on that, sorry, I'll just say one more thing is I'm being very harsh here in the way I'm saying it. You do have to offer some perspective and charm, and back to the work that we were talking about earlier and using MITRE. You can use those types of things, right? You're not talking in the sort of technical speak, but you can talk about the fact that, you know, hey, we all know that you can click on an ad in, you know, Google. Google doesn't know that it's a bad ad, and it takes you somewhere it doesn't need to. And now, you know, are you able to block it? Are you able to not? Employees are our greatest risk, not just phishing, but all the other places they go on their corporate device. And so that's why I think using this in combination, the threat intelligence, it takes extra work from you as a security professional, but frankly, you know, that's your job. And I think that that's one way that you can kind of continue to push for these controls, because, you know, at the other, and somebody said at the financial organization, we have a strong focus on third party. That's the thing is a lot of companies, I'm sure on this call, I come from the financial services. I worked at American Express and PayPal before here. I'm still at a financial services, but it's not nearly as regulated. Companies that are heavily regulated, everything I'm talking about, like it already happens. Most companies, though, are still on this bandwagon of trying to give some balance to employees, especially in the pandemic. I get it, but there are other ways to offer that kind of support or offer outlets that aren't putting corporate data, you know, at risk. So.
I love it. And someone said this is a safe place to vent.
Yeah.
So I think probably a lot of people are nodding their heads too and agreeing with everything that you just said, Marlys. So thank you for that. Jason, should we grab some of the Q&A while we've got a few moments remaining? I think we have 7 minutes left.
Yeah, go for it. By all means, let's open this up and let's obviously tackle some of these questions coming in from the audience here. So fantastic stuff thus far. Marlys, it looks like you've opened up Pandora's box and they want to ask you quite a few more questions. So the first one comes along and says, anyone on the board that has an IT or security background, would you think this could make a difference? I'm starting to see more and more requests for his expertise for boards, for this expertise for boards. So anyone on the board with IT or security backgrounds? Yes.
So I'll just share with you. We actually have a very large board at our company. When I joined, one of our board members actually sits on the board of McAfee and Visa. So fantastic, right? Fantastic support. She was the first one to say at one of the meetings, you know, everyone pay attention to what she's saying. We have a fiduciary duty. I mean, that was a literal sort of like heads up, everybody should be focused on it. But to that point, having that technical expertise, I think really helps to, like, those are my best friends. So we actually just obtained a new board member. He was the former CIO at Kaiser Permanente. I now have one-to-one conversations with him leading up to board meetings. It really makes a difference because they can offer a perspective not only on, you know, the cost or the approach, but also be able to really speak to the overall risk and complexity of what it is that you're trying to do. Plus, as a security professional, depending on where you report in the organization, I happen to report into IT. I have a very, very supportive CIO, but sometimes what the CIO is being asked to deliver from a technology perspective, it can be, you know, at odds with our security risk profile. And so being able to share that separately and then have board members that really know how to sort of double click into that, it really does help. So, and by the way, becoming a board member with security expertise, that's what all of us should strive to do. These are great jobs to get, especially as you think about retirement.
And Julie, I want to pose that question to you as well, because obviously at AttackIQ, you guys work with and speak with a lot of CISOs. And now you have your CISO advisory board that you work with as well. You starting to see more and more CISOs kind of take positions in the board, or IT execs as well. Is that something you're starting to see?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a great opportunity, as Marlys mentioned. In fact, Marlys also sits on our Informed Defenders Council, which is a mix of both like industry thought leaders and existing customers, really to come together and share best practices. And one of the conversations that we had a prior meeting before was, how do you build rapport with your board, right? If you don't necessarily have the right technical expertise or advocates in your board, how do you start to educate them and bring them along so that they understand, you know, what is purple teaming, why we do need to invest in a different control or another control or a platform that gives insights to how we're doing, like AttackIQ. And we're publishing that back out into the community, which I'd be happy to follow up with some of the articles that came out of our conversation as a team around that very particular topic.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Question here from Mario. Do you use the platform to build/test use cases for your SIM, red team, and threat hunts? I'll go to Marlys first with that. Do you use the platform to build test use cases for your SIM, red team, or threat hunts?
Yep, that's exactly what we use it for. So we have incorporated it into our SIM, and I'm being hesitant to kind of share specifics, right, as most of you will appreciate. So outside of AttackIQ, you're not going to hear me use any other specific vendor names, but we have incorporated it within our SIM, and we do use it for purple teaming. It is a great platform to kind of simulate red team. You know, problem with red team is it's like one point in time at that one point, you know, and so we've been incorporating a lot more purple team exercises. But all of our, you know, different, like the endpoint data protection, the DLP, the endpoint, the SIM, all of the logging, all of that has been basically linked together, and that's how we're using it. And then we're also using it, like I said, for purple teaming.
Fantastic. Julie, do you see a lot of CISOs using the MITRE ATT&CK framework to present the current state of a security program to the board?
I would say absolutely. I mean, we were an early founding member of the Center for Threat Informed Defense because we're just so passionate about, you know, sharing information in the community and working on frameworks and, you know, bringing all that goodness back out into, you know, the champions that are out there, people who are defending their customers, their data, you know, again, their brand reputations. And so this is a really important part of the strategy, 100%.
Fantastic, brilliant stuff. Okay, another question coming here. It's a question here from Tanwir, and I'll give this to you, Marlys, as well. Think bad, do good. Wouldn't this require a total cultural shift?
Yeah, it does. I will tell you, the cultural shift for our company was, it continues to be particularly hard because if you look at, so CSSA is part of, we are the insurer for AAA. AAA is all about how do you, you know, protect your members, you know, roadside assistance. So you think about that security. And so inherently, you always think and see the good in things. And so being able to, you know, every conversation have a, yeah, I understand how you're going to use that, but let me now tell you about not the worst case, but definitely a possible case scenario. You know, having those conversations and driving that culturally, it is tough because culturally we're just nice and optimistic, and you know, honestly, that is really part of an inherent part of CSA culture. And so it's been, I wouldn't say tougher, but it's definitely tough to be sort of like Debbie Downer to the room, which is like, yeah, I know you want to do that, except that remember when you offer guest access through Azure, you're inviting people in and they can touch and, so you start walking them through what those possibilities and risks are. And I think it's helped to kind of drive, some difference. I think the other part, just to offer really quickly, is consequence management, because honestly, sometimes you just can't change the culture, and you can only do it through, taking action on employees that, if you see somebody that continuously clicks the phishing button on those campaigns, HR is going to be calling them. And I think you have to, marry up that sort of cultural change with some degree of consequence management, because these people can take down the company with really what I think sometimes are very careless things. So I think that combination is helpful.
So a little follow-up question to there. A question came with Jake saying, with people being the greatest risk to any org, does anyone, or do you, I suppose, implement some form of consequences to employees responsible for security-related events? How do you hold the employees accountable?
So for us, right now, we do training. So first thing that we do, if you click once on the phishing, you get sent to spot the fish. Second, you get sent to a informative / it takes an hour, and it's somewhat, I'm not going to say boring, but you are forced to go through it and pass it. The third time you click, that's it. HR is having a phone call with you, and there are, very serious conversations around what that means. I will share that at a prior employer, they had acquired a company. First time that an employee clicked, they fired them. I mean, that was an absolute fact, because it is such an intense risk to, the organization. So I do think companies are taking more, serious measures. I think there's a balance, but the reality is, somebody clicks on that and they keep clicking, and you can see in some of these tools, they just keep clicking on stuff, and you're like, stop clicking. It was an actual real phishing. And of course we were stopping it. And finally our head of the SOC called the woman, said, I can see that you're still clicking on this. I want you to know what you're doing right now. You are clicking on a real thing. You could be, that's where people get with it. I know everybody on this chat is just like, yeah, you do get that feeling, but yes, the answer is yes. I think more and more companies are doing it. And I think there's more justification, especially when you start thinking about the liability to the company.
Thank you very much. Julie, obviously we spoke a little bit about SolarWinds and how that's kind of like changed the landscape a little bit, or changed people's mindset. Have you noticed a change in the way that organizations and CISOs in particular assess third-party vendors now as a result of the SolarWinds breach?
I know those conversations are happening. I would probably, lob this back over to Marlys for her, input on that. But, the way that people are starting to really think through the end-to-end, the back doors that could be, as I mentioned earlier, open, but just, not aware of them. And the conversations just being more progressive in the organization between the risk team, the threat intelligence teams, and the more collaborative sharing. Like, that's absolutely something that we're seeing as a way to break down silos and make sure that the right conversations are happening quickly. Information's been being shared quickly, and that teams are absolutely working together in a much more collaborative way. But Marlys, over to you if you feel that there's, you're seeing a shift in third-party vendor evaluations. That was the crux of the question.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. Certainly we have continued to evolve. We're also using intelligence. There's some, tools and platforms out there that give you a little bit more deeper understanding of the risk profile of particular companies that you're working with. That's very helpful. The one thing I will say that we changed in terms of our organization is I created a team of people last year that are, you could call them sort of security architects, but we call them engagement consultants. And so for some of our higher risk engagements, meaning, there's lots of data, it's a bigger deal that, maybe we're partnering with an external firm on. We actually have them do a much deeper assessment. Some of them included me, and I'm having conversations as a CISO to the CISO of the organization. And I think it's really important because I think there is an assumption of safety in some of our, these large scale vendors that exist. There is not, I don't care who you are. I'm not going to name, but you all know who I'm talking about, the big ones. There's always questions you can ask. And I learned it from the best, which was American Express, because they knew, and these aren't like crazy questions. It's, hey, I noticed that you have a fourth party listed in your contract. What is their, oh, they have read-write access to all of our corporate content at any given, what? And you don't even have key rotation? I mean, so that's where I've seen our third-party assessment go levels deeper, because SOC, the SOC report is helpful, but you really can't necessarily depend on that. And I think that, the more questions that we're asking up front, and really having a deeper understanding, especially around things like access control. I mean, let's face it, the SolarWinds breach was in part, due to, some of that, and well, certainly it was true in the Capital One breach. So the answer is yes. I think the question then becomes, how do you balance kind of time to market and speed of your engagements when you're trying to bring in a new tool or a new partner? That's where you kind of have to weigh the balance. But, frankly, it just requires more humans having those conversations and digging in layers deeper, and then either presenting the risk, to the leadership team making the decision, or incorporating some of that into the contract. So I definitely encourage people to have a much deeper assessment than just your standard TPA.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really sorry, everybody, but I need to end the session as we need to reset for the next one. We could have kept going for a long time there. That was so brilliant. Thank you so much for your candidness, both Marlys and Julie. Really appreciate that. Really appreciate all the insights provided. Thank you all attendees again for your contribution to this session, both in the chat and in the Q&A. As always, we didn't get to all the questions, so feel free to reach out to Julie, Marlys. I'm sure they'd be more than happy for you to just reach out to them on LinkedIn, connect. We're networking as well here, folks, as well as learning. So please feel free to do so. And of course, if anyone would like us to help facilitate any introductions to Julie or the AttackIQ team, you can find us and let us know, and we'll be more than happy to do so. So once again, I will ask all the attendees, wherever they may be, to join me in a virtual round of applause for our speakers. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much to both of you.